Hello and welcome to today's journey. Close your eyes, if you like, and imagine dust in your teeth, a creaking wooden wheel just feet from your ear, and a horizon so wide it makes the world feel both infinite and empty. This is the Oregon Trail, sometime in the mid-1800s. You're not the parent. You're not the one steering the oxen or hunting for rabbits. You're a child, maybe 7, maybe 12, caught in the slow, bone-jarring shuffle westward. And the truth is, this journey for you kind of sucks. Let's begin before you even take your first step. The goodbye. You've said goodbye to everything you knew, your friends, your grandparents, the old oak behind your house. Maybe your dog had to be left behind. Your family has packed everything they own into a canvas-covered wagon, barely bigger than a bedroom closet. There's no room for toys, no room for comfort, and no room for fear. But the grown-ups are already dreaming of Oregon, land, freedom, maybe gold. And you're handed a knapsack and told to keep up the walk. Despite what you might think, you're not riding in the wagon. Very few children did. The wagon is for supplies, flour, bacon, tools, blankets, and barrels of water, if you're lucky. Children walk and walk and walk. You wake before dawn to the sounds of camp, the hiss of a cook fire, the low murmur of adult voices, and the bray of oxen. If it rained the night before, your shoes squelch in the mud. If it didn't, dust cakes your ankles and stings your eyes. And you walk 15 to 20 miles a day, 6 days a week. Your feet blister, your legs ache, and there's nothing but scrub brush and sky for hours. Sometimes you cry, but only when you're far enough behind that your parents can't hear. Chores, not games. You might think, at least I'd get a break at camp. Not really. Children on the trail had jobs, important ones. You fetch water, maybe from a stream you've never seen before, maybe one with snakes. You collect buffalo chips, which is a nice way of saying dried poop, to use as firewood. You help stir the cornmeal mush, or you wash pans in a tin bucket while swatting mosquitoes away. And if the oxen wander off in the night, you're one of the first sent out at dawn to find them. No swings, no skipping ropes, no books unless someone remembered to bring a worn Bible or an old reader. If you're very lucky, someone might carve you a corn husk doll or a string puzzle, but that's only if there's time. There usually isn't. Sickness. And then there's the worst part, the invisible danger. Cholera, dysentery, measles. If one child on the trail caught something, the others often did too. With no doctors and only rudimentary medicine, children died often. Sometimes a cough would begin in the morning, and by sunset a child might be gone. A small grave would be dug by the side of the trail, and a family would say a quick prayer. A wooden marker might be left behind, if there was time to spare a piece of wood. And the next day the wagons moved on, always west. Fear you live in fear too, not the kind of fear you know today, not of monsters or tests at school, but real fear. The river crossings where wagons could tip over and drown an entire family. The rattlesnakes hiding in the grass. The thunder that might spook the oxen and cause a stampede. And yes, sometimes conflict with native tribes. Though many tribes were peaceful and some even traded or helped, your parents might warn you not to wander, just in case. And so the world feels dangerous all the time. But still, amid the dust and blisters and silence, there were moments. Sometimes the sky turned pink and gold at sunset, and the prairie looked like an endless sea. Sometimes a traveller ahead would let you sit in the wagon for a while. Sometimes you'd spot a prairie dog or a fox darting between the sagebrush, and you'd forget your aching feet just long enough to smile. Some children wrote about the experience years later. They remembered the wild strawberries they found, the time it snowed in spring, or the way the stars looked brighter than anywhere else in the world. But in the moment, all they knew was the exhaustion, because being a child on the Oregon Trail meant growing up faster than you wanted. It meant calloused hands and sleepless nights, and watching your parents cry without understanding why. And when you finally made it to Oregon, if you did, you were never quite the same child who left. Let's step off the trail for a moment and into the snow. The year is 1846. The Oregon Trail has already claimed lives, but this story, this one, has lingered in American memory like a ghost. The tale of the Donner Party is not just about hardship, it's about choices, delays, misjudgment, and what happens when winter comes early and help comes too late. You may have heard of them, but now let's walk beside them. The Dream. In the spring of 1846, nearly 90 people, families, children, teamsters, and hired hands, set off from Independence, Missouri, bound for California. They weren't foolish. They weren't thrill seekers. They were farmers, carpenters, and homemakers. Among them were the Donner brothers, George and Jacob, and a well-known man named James Reed. The Donners were relatively well off. They brought wagons, livestock, books, and even a piano. Children rode with mothers under white canvas tops, and in the early weeks the journey felt almost joyful. But everything changed when they chose a shortcut. The Hastings Cutoff. In Wyoming, the group decided to try an alternate route through the Wasatch Mountains and across the salt flats of Utah, known as the Hastings Cutoff. It was advertised as faster, more direct. But it was a trap. The mountains were rugged. The salt flats were endless and waterless. The trail was untested, and the man who had written about it, Lansford Hastings, was nowhere to be found. Oxen died from exhaustion. Wagons sank into brine-soaked earth. Morale plummeted. What was meant to save time cost them weeks. And by the time they reached the Sierra Nevada mountains in late October, snow had already begun to fall. The snow falls early. They were just a day's journey from the summit, just one more push, and they would have made it through the pass before the snow sealed it shut. But fate was not kind. A fierce snowstorm swept in early. The pass became buried in deep drifts. The mountains turned white, and the trail disappeared beneath it. The Donner Party was trapped. Some camped at Truckee Lake, now called Donner Lake. Others, including the Donners themselves, were stranded several miles back at Alder Creek, their wagons broken, oxen dead, and tents flapping in the wind. And then the long, bitter waiting began. Hunger. At first they rationed what they had: flour, bacon, dried fruit. Children were fed first. They boiled leather from ox harnesses, chewed on hides, roasted animal bones. The snow didn't stop. Weeks passed, then months. In desperation, a small group of the strongest, later called the Forlorn Hope, set out on foot to try to reach help. They carried makeshift snowshoes, a little food, and whispered prayers. After more than a month in the mountains, they stumbled into safety, barely alive. Some had resorted to the unthinkable to survive. When news of the Donner Party reached California, rescue missions were launched. But they had to travel back over those same treacherous passes. The first relief party didn't arrive until February. By then, it was too late for many. The unthinkable. The stories that followed shocked the country. Survivors spoke in hushed tones of what had occurred in those cabins and tents, of how, when people died, their bodies were preserved by the cold and eventually used as food. Not all did it. Some refused even while starving. Others saw it as a last resort to keep their children alive. It was not madness, it was calculation, terrible, reluctant, and human. And still the snow fell. the children. Let's not forget that nearly half the Donner Party were children. Many survived. Some were carried out in rescue blankets. Some walked barefoot through slush, their feet wrapped in rags. Some never saw their parents again. One little girl, Patty Reed, had been told to throw away her doll before the mountain crossing. There was no room. But she secretly kept it tucked in her dress. That doll is now in a museum in California, a tiny reminder of what the children endured. The reckoning. In the end, 87 people began the journey with the Donner Party. Only 48 survived. The names of the dead were recorded. The survivors were questioned endlessly. Some were judged, others praised for their endurance. James Reed, the man who had earlier been banished for killing another traveller in self-defence, had made it through the mountains separately and returned with help. He rescued his wife and children, one by one. The Donner brothers did not survive. The lesson. The tragedy of the Donner Party was not just about snow and starvation. It was about how fragile civilization becomes in the wilderness, how quickly the rules of society can vanish when all that matters is staying alive. But it's also about perseverance, about mothers who sang lullabies to starving children, about fathers who dug through snow with bare hands, about strangers who carried others on their backs. It is a story wrapped in ice and fire, and it echoes through the mountains still. Now listen closely. If you walk through parts of Nebraska, Wyoming, Utah, or Oregon today, you may feel it. The silence of a forgotten settlement, a broken chimney standing alone in a field, a street with no houses, a well filled with leaves instead of water. These are the ghost towns of the Oregon Trail, places once full of dreams and wagon wheels, now left to the wind. Let's wander through them together. The rise. When pioneers moved west in the 1800s, they didn't always wait to reach Oregon. Sometimes they stopped part way because of injury, because of illness, or because they simply fell in love with the land they found along the way. And where groups of settlers stopped, towns were born. Some were built around trading posts, like Fort Kearny or Fort Laramie, where weary travellers could rest, resupply, or fix a broken wagon wheel. Others grew around natural landmarks like rivers or passes. A town might spring up around a blacksmith shop, or a general store, or a saloon serving hot coffee and hope. As the trail pushed westward, so too did the idea of permanence. Wooden buildings replaced tents, churches were built, schools opened, babies were born on land that had never heard a piano until then. But not all towns were built to last. The gold rush effect. In 1848, gold was discovered in California. Suddenly, the Oregon Trail wasn't just a route for families and farmers, it was a highway for dreamers. Men raced west in droves, and with them came entrepreneurs, builders, gamblers, and conmen. Towns sprang up overnight near rumoured gold veins. Saloons multiplied. Dance halls opened. General stores filled with pickaxes, tin pans, and whiskey. And then, just as quickly, the gold dried up, or the mines collapsed, or the rumour turned out to be a lie. And so they left, in droves. What remained? Shattered window panes, broken doors, and silence. Disease and disaster. Some towns didn't die because of gold, they died from disease. Cholera swept through many trailside towns. With little understanding of germs, people drank from contaminated wells or rivers used by animals and other travellers. Sometimes a town would be bustling one week and buried the next. Fires were another enemy. Made almost entirely of wood and kindling, entire towns could burn down from a single lantern, and without modern fire brigades, many never rebuilt. Some were abandoned slowly, others in a single night. The railroad. But perhaps the biggest killer of Oregon trail towns was progress. By the 1860s, the Transcontinental Railroad was being built. Tracks connected east to west in a way no wagon ever could. What had once taken 5 or 6 months by covered wagon could now be done in a matter of days by train. Towns not near the railroad tracks? Forgotten. A bustling wagon stop might be completely bypassed by steel and steam. Inns, blacksmiths and wheelwrights saw their customers vanish. With no business, people packed up and moved again, chasing the next opportunity. Wooden buildings rotted. Churches collapsed inward. Cemeteries remained, with headstones worn illegible by time. Whispers from the dust. Let's pause here by a ghost town whose name has been lost. Imagine walking down its main street, weeds growing through the floorboards of a saloon, a cracked teacup in the dirt, a rusted horseshoe. In one town in Kansas called Diamond Springs, there were once 20 buildings, a station, and a spring so beautiful it became a legend among travellers. Today, the only thing left is the spring itself, bubbling under prairie grass. In another, Boise City in Oklahoma, buildings were constructed during the Dust Bowl, only to be abandoned when the land itself gave up. Crops failed, sand buried fences, people fled, and still the shells remain. The stories that linger. Ghost towns are not just empty, they're full of memory. Each crumbling house was once swept clean by a young mother. Each collapsed barn once echoed with laughter and livestock. Each schoolhouse, now open to the sky, once rang with chalk on slate. And every cemetery tells you this. They lived. They tried. They built something where there had been nothing. And then the trail moved on. Why we remember today, some ghost towns have been preserved as historic sites. Others are slowly sinking back into the earth. Grass grows through saloon doors. Trees sprout in the centre of forgotten parlours. A windmill creaks in the distance, turning just a little slower each year. But if you listen closely, you might hear the Oregon Trail still whispering. It speaks in the rustle of tall grass through wagon ruts. It echoes in wind scraping across weathered clapboards. It lingers in old diaries left behind, in inked hopes of land and peace and something better. These ghost towns are not failures. They are markers of courage, of movement, of human stories written on the bones of a vast and changing land. Imagine the prairie at dusk. The sun slips low, casting long shadows over the tall grass. Somewhere far off, coyotes begin to yip. The wagon wheels have stopped turning for the day, and fires begin to crackle to life. You smell wood smoke, coffee, and something else, meat roasting. You've been invited, just for tonight, to dine by firelight with a rare figure on the Oregon Trail, a wealthy wagon captain. Let's take a seat by the fire, where canvas flaps in the wind and stars begin to scatter across the sky. Who was the wagon captain? First, let's be clear, most people on the trail were not rich. They were farmers, labourers and tradesmen who sold everything they owned to buy a wagon and a few oxen. But every now and then, you'd encounter someone different, someone with means. A former merchant, perhaps, or a landowner looking to start a new empire in the West. This man, we'll call him Captain Abernathy, was just such a figure. He wasn't a military captain. That was a courtesy title earned from leading several families westward and from owning more wagons than most had shoes. He wore a wide-brimmed hat of finer wool, a coat lined in fur, and gloves without patches. His boots were polished, at least they were when he set out. He had a pocket watch and a pair of spectacles he only wore to read. And his wagon, it wasn't just large, it was a travelling estate. The luxury wagon. While most wagons were tightly packed with sacks of flour, barrels of salted pork, and little else, Abernathy's had shelves. velvet-lined boxes for silverware, a tin bath, a chest filled with fine linen shirts and jars of imported preserves. He even had a folding table with matching wooden chairs. He employed servants, 2 men to care for the oxen, and a hired cook who trailed the main wagon with a cart of cast iron cookware and fresh herbs growing in a crate. This was not how most people travelled west. But Abernathy believed that civilization should follow the man, rather than the man following civilization. The meal tonight's dinner is already underway. A rabbit stew simmers in a Dutch oven with onions and wild carrots found earlier that day. A roast quail, basted in butter, turns slowly on a spit. There is bread, not the hard, flourless trail kind, but fresh and soft, made with precious yeast starter that Abernathy had carefully nurtured in a crock jar wrapped in cloth. You're handed a tin plate, not the usual scorched mess tin, but one polished smooth with a matching spoon. A linen napkin. Coffee is served black from a copper kettle, and there's even a bottle of brandy making the rounds. Just one sip for the adults, of course. He smiles as he offers you a slice of peach preserved in syrup. This, he says, is how the West should be met. With dignity. Conversation by firelight. Around the fire, conversation flows more easily than usual. The stories are not of hardship tonight, but of dreams. One man speaks of building a sawmill. A woman talks of opening a school in Oregon Territory. Abernathy himself sketches out his vision. Vineyards, a great house overlooking the Columbia River, a new kind of estate in a new kind of land. There's laughter. There's hope. For a moment, the trail feels like something else, like the start of a grand adventure, not a dangerous gamble. But there is something more in the air, too, a hush beneath the talk, a knowledge that not everyone will make it, that tonight's dinner is rare, maybe once in a lifetime, that tomorrow someone's ox might die or someone's child might fall ill, and Abernathy's fine table will feel like it belongs to another world. Still, tonight the stars are bright, the stew is warm, and hope is thick enough to taste. Contrasts and consequences. Now not everyone admired men like Abernathy. Some saw them as arrogant, flaunting wealth when others had none. His servants got the worst of the deal, expected to work harder and longer while others rested, and wealth could not protect against all dangers. One fallen wheel, one flash flood, and even the richest man was just another traveller in the mud. But sometimes having a captain like Abernathy meant protection. His wagons had more supplies. He hired scouts, he had maps, compasses, and the kind of connections that could help negotiate with forts and supply posts. Families near him often benefited from his planning and his leftovers. Even his brandy was sometimes offered to ease pain when someone was sick or dying. End of the journey. Many like Abernathy did make it to Oregon. Some became successful ranchers, businessmen, or politicians. Others found that the West was not as welcoming as they'd hoped. But the image of the wealthy wagon captain, polished boots by the fire, sipping coffee from a porcelain cup while coyotes sang in the distance, endured. A strange blend of civility and wilderness, of comfort and risk. And for one night, as the trail quieted and bellies were full, he gave others a glimpse of what they might one day have too. The fire burns low. The fire is dying now. The stars are sharp in the dark sky. The cook gathers plates, the servants fold the chairs, and you, perhaps wrapped in a borrowed wool blanket, feel the last warmth of that strange and lavish dinner on the trail. Tomorrow will bring blisters, broken wheels, and the endless rhythm of footsteps and hooves. But tonight was different. Tonight you saw how the West could be met, with grace, and firelight, and peach preserves, shared like gold. That'll be all for today's journey. Thank you for joining me. I hope to see you again soon.